Cloud. Sounds so official. It's
Question on your video on the creed,
yes,
which I haven't seen yet. Was that in an email or is that on the foundation's part of the webpage?
it was in the email that you should have gotten to remind you, I think on Saturday or
Okay.
Sunday. It's at the bottom of that. There are links. There are links.
I don't think I'm getting my emails,
Okay.
right?
Super. Is this your correct email?
Make sure they're correct.
Squirrely.
It's, no, not the two, it's at.
Oh,
That's what.
oh, but she should know that. But anyway,
I got one, but that's it.
you got one.
Yeah.
All right, so you might want to check your junk folder.
Okay.
That's, our email programs are really, when you get a group email, they
Okay,
don't like it. And they like to put it in the junk folder. So
Okay.
if you go to your junk folder underneath your, and you click on that, it'll show you everything that's put in there. If you just
Okay.
scroll through that, if you see something sort of Lutheran, if you right click, you can go down and say, or it says block, you can go there and say never block.
okay,
So
okay.
anyway, yeah, let's see if that, but I'll check
Well,
on
I
mine.
got one, so
Yes,
it's kind of
yeah.
weird.
Yeah, and it's random. It's weird that way, so. All right. Well, good to see you guys. Thanks for, oh, we got a chat. Let's see. I don't want to chat with AI. Okay. And how come we don't? Did somebody come up?
Yeah, it has a red dot by Sophia, maybe.
Oh, yeah. I've asked her, we will be watching the recording for the session later. Sophia needs us a bit more tonight. Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, super. All right, well, hello, Jennifer and Ani, on the record. So we are going to get right to work tonight because of our little bit reduced time. This officially is our last class, if you can believe it. Next week, on Wednesday, will be our new member kind of orientation. So if you plan to be baptized or affirm your baptism and become a member, and we can talk a little bit about that tonight, then you definitely want to come next week. And because that's more practical. What does it mean to be a member? And even if you're unsure, like I'm thinking I might be a member, but I'm not sure about what that means for me. You can still come and learn a lot about the church and stuff. So you're not committing to being a member by coming next week, but that's more of an orientation to the church and talking about our mission statement and history and some of that. So yeah, so that's what next week is. So it's not really, the class isn't really over, but it's a little bit of a shift. And before you go tonight, I have some information sheets that if you do want to become a member, then I want you to take that and bring that back bring it back next week. And we'll, it's like phone numbers and emails and addresses and stuff like that. So, so that would be good. Questions about that? Yeah. Okay. All right, well, let's get into our session for tonight and we'll roll through some things. So last week we didn't quite finish. I did press record, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. We didn't quite finish what we needed to talk about, so I'm going to touch on giving and do it quickly so we can get to social ethics in the church and society stuff. This is where we've been, of course, and it's been a great journey. So as we talk now about what disciples do, and I'm gonna just reduce this a little bit. So when it comes to giving, so remember we talked about stewardship last week. We talked about stewardship of your gifts your spiritual gifts and the inventory I gave to some of you. If you did it paper and could bring that back next week, if you didn't bring it this week, if you did it online, great. Kathleen will mail you the results, which is cool. And that's just a little tool to think about how you in your everyday life and when it comes to the church can bless others with the gifts God's given you. But we also think about what God's given us monetarily too. And so I'd like to just give a quick little talk on financial giving. So we're getting really practical. If you don't know, the number one reason still to this day, when people are asked why don't you come to church? They say, all the church cares about is my
Money.
Money.
There it is, Kathy. So that's right. So, but yet Jesus, I mean, I don't forget the percentage of his parables that have to do with money. So Luther would say your pocketbook is where the rubber meets the road, or the last thing to be converted about somebody is their pocketbook or something. We want to talk about that. Principles of financial giving. So I'm just going to put a bunch of bullet points up here. Well, the first reason you give is the same reason you give your spiritual gifts, and you pray and you worship and you do everything you do is because of what Jesus has done for you. Remember that because therefore thing. Another concept that's important is if you think about everything belonging to God, that really we don't own anything. We've been loaned what we have, and to steward it, never take care of something for someone else. So that really frames things, I think, that wow, everything is God's. So some people will even argue you can't really talk about giving to God. You can talk about returning something to God but this little bit of a semantics game. So that's important if we start there. I think we also have a need to give. Think about I love the story of the manna in the wilderness. Remember with the Exodus, the people go out in the desert and they're whining because they don't have anything to eat. And God gives them manna, which is the sticky bread substance that they can collect every day. But there's one caveat. Does any of you remember what it is? There's one caveat when they got the manna. There's one thing you can't do with it.
You can't save it.
There it is. It would spoil. So it was like you have to trust God each day to bring manna, and manna would form every day for them. And if they tried to save it, it spoiled. It's a little bit like that with our gifts and even our financial resources. We have a need to give. In the Old Testament, they did something that's really strange to us. They would oftentimes, when they came to worship, they would offer God an offering. That's not weird, but they would offer a grain offering or an animal, and they would burn that up because in their minds, the smoke goes to God, kind of, or that this is the way. But they gave it to God. Nothing was done with that. Didn't do any good for anybody else, but they had a need to give, and that's it. It'd be like if we took our offering and we went and we you would go, what? You let it go, as you should, and that would be wrong. But somewhere along the line, it obviously is like, when we give to God, we can do a lot of great things with that. And when you give to this church, we preach the word and administer the sacraments for 700 members of this church and many visitors. And we serve our community like you saw us doing over in the gathering place. So we put that to good use. We have a staff that does this great ministry. We have a building here that has to have insurance and lots of upkeep and, goes on. We'll talk next week about our budget and how that works. But, so it's good that we do good things with what we do. But bottom line, separate from the need of the church to do good things with what you offer is just your need to give. It rounds out your life. It's just a part of the way, but I like I like giving because money could easily become my God. Okay, yeah, thanks. It could easily become my God. And by saying I'm gonna give a certain percentage every month, no matter what, it kind of keeps it in its place. I think money wants to rule. Treasures want to rule. It does reflect our priorities. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road. And then Jesus says something really interesting, and I don't know if I mentioned it in this class yet, but there's the famous statement where Jesus says, wherever you put your treasure, there your heart will be. Just break that down for a minute. Wherever you put your treasure, where you put your treasure, there your heart will be. Now, we typically think about it differently. We think where your heart is where you're gonna put your treasure. Now, that's true. But I'm a sinner, so sometimes my heart is not in the right place. So I don't always follow my heart. I prayerfully follow the Holy Spirit flowing in me, but I always get nervous with Disney movies and say, follow your heart. It's like, no. But sometimes my heart's in the right place, so it's not all bad. But nonetheless, it's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, where you put your treasure, there your heart will be. I'd mentioned Mark Allen Powell, I think, in a previous class. He's a New Testament scholar and professor that's done a lot of writing. I like a lot of what he says, but he said, you know, he had a woman come to him early in his ministry when he was in parish ministry before he became a teacher in the seminary. And she asked him, Pastor, I want to love God more. How do I do it? And he was like, I never had anybody ask me that. I didn't know what to say. And he didn't. He said he didn't really have a good answer for her as he thought back on it. But he says now what he would say is give God more. Where you put your treasure, there your heart will be. We can determine what our heart loves by where we put our treasure. So financial giving, as well as giving of your time, sets your heart in the right place. Does that make sense? What do you think about that? So, yeah. So these are some reasons when it comes to financial giving. People always ask me how much when it comes to finances. We do not talk about the tithe as the standard here. A lot of Christian churches do it. The tithe was the Old Testament standard that God always got the first fruits, and it was 10% when it was in the amount of something. I think that's a fabulous goal to get to, but I don't think everybody can start there. We don't like to talk about a percentage because it gets legalistic, like, oh, I'm giving 10% now, so I'm set, or I'm horrible, I can't give 10%. You know, we get worried about that as Lutherans, you know, with our law gospel distinction, and don't want people to think that, you know, that somehow if they don't give that, then they're out of favor with God. We want everything to be a response. So maybe you start at 1%, maybe you start at 2%, maybe you start at 5%, wherever, maybe you start at 0.5%. The concept of first fruits giving is important because you decide ahead of time and you stick to that. How much are we going to give if we give with what's left over at the end of the month? Well, maybe I should speak for myself, but you know, it tends to go out the door pretty quickly. So my wife and I say, we're gonna give this much, and it comes right out the top. And so, now if you lose your job, well, that's gonna have to change, you know? I know, so, you know, so again, sometimes people can give more than 10%, some people can't. We're the body of Christ, so we work together in this. And so we don't necessarily, you know, we don't discourage the tithe, but we don't say that, you know, because some people could give a lot more than 10%. I know one pastor that said, I'm going to give up 1% more every year. And he started, you know, like halfway through his ministry. And when he finished, he was given 25%. I'm like, whoa, you have way more faith than me, you know? And it's not like the pastor is, you know, wealthy. So, you know, does that help? So we don't worry about the 10% so much. We want you to give your first fruits. Our electronic giving stuff, which we talk about next week, can help you with that because you just go on and it comes out automatically. The downside is you don't have anything to put in offering plate. And that's a very symbolic act. It's an act of worship to put something in an offering plate. So we also have little cards that you can put in there and say, I give online. Because, you know, you have put something in that offering plate. It's just not at that time. So you know, that's an important thing. How much? Do it cheerfully, not grudgingly. If you can't do that, then don't do it. You know, stretch yourself and grow. We talked about that. And yes, I put a little sad face. The national average of our denomination is like 1%, 1 to 2% for a Lutheran. In the Latter-day Saint Church, now I've had people challenge me on this, but I thought that it used to be, it was a requirement that even sometimes you had to show your taxes, so they would know. But I had some Mormons say, no, that doesn't happen, so they jump. So that may not be true, but look what the Mormon Church can do. They're the wealthiest institution in this country, by far, as far as a nonprofit, supposed nonprofit. They invest everything that comes in. I mean, it's crazy. So, but anyway, again, I'm happy that we're where we're at because I don't ever want to say you've got to do anything. One of my favorite Lutheran theologians, Gerhard Forde, used to say in his class, just to kind of get people's cackles up a little bit. He would tell his class, okay, now what are you going to do now that you don't have to do anything? It's like, oh, I don't have to. No, you get to. Not have to, you know, because anyway, so that's you know, that's a little bit of principles for giving. So our topic tonight is ethics, social ethics, and action and issues. And but before I do that, questions about the little financial giving thing. Okay, good. Kathy, you're good at home here. I had you minimized here, so I'll get you back on the screen. There we go. All right. You're good there at home?
Yeah, I am. I like the idea, on a certain level of it being a gift, you know, like an offering and a sacrifice, you know, and so maybe it is supposed to hurt a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and, yeah,
I like that.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Another way to put it, it's both duty and delight. You know, we do have a duty. We want to do our part. We're part of the body of Christ. We want to do our part. We want to support the ministry of the church, but ultimately we want it to be a delight. Like this is the best part of the worship service when I get to give, you know, because you know we have a need. So we want it to be both. And yes, a sacrifice and we're giving a gift, but it's also we want to challenge ourselves and if it doesn't hurt a little bit, you know, maybe we need to think about that. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. That's good. Yeah,
Well, and
please.
just sort of the Starbucks rule.
What's that?
Well, I mean, if we so easily spend $6 for a drink 5 days a week at Starbucks, surely we could give that same $26 to the church. You know, like
Right.
it's a matter of perspective. It kind of can show a measure of selfishness about where we put our treasure, kind of like you said, and maybe taking a little look at that, and realizing in the scheme of things,
Yeah.
where's the better
Yeah.
benefit?
Mhm. You just made me think of something, Tom, but Tom, you were gonna chime in.
Well, this may be a really stupid question, but I mean, I think Gail and I would look at this as, you know, incremental to other kinds of philanthropy that we might be involved with.
Absolutely.
So I wondered how churches look at other sources of philanthropy as also a
Yeah,
kind of service.
I absolutely affirm that that's part of your first fruits giving. And, you know, what the amount that you can, it's like God's given us so much to take care of. He wants us to take care of our household, our family, our spouses, our kids. We, you know, of it. You know, and then how much, and he wants us to think about our future too. I mean, in this world, we need to think about retirement and stuff like that. That's not totally selfish. I want to do that so I'm not a burden to someone else if I can. But then, yeah, so what I give the Lutheran Social Services or the Red Cross or is a part of that. And I encourage that 100%. Yeah.
I think it's just important to have the feeling that you're giving out of love, not out of buying your way into a club or buying your way into salvation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
have you ever known anybody that listened to big online churches? There's only a few that I'm thinking of, not a normal
Right.
online church, but there were some that just talk about off-put or anything.
Yeah.
So if you can give to God out of love to take and double your, go and do more with what than I could ever, right?
Right.
That's great. That's 100%.
Yeah. Right. Beautiful.
Just don't look at it like I'm giving to buy my way into something that's a free gift to you.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's great.
I'm really glad you brought up that kind of expression of Christianity, which I think is a perversion of the faith, the kind of prosperity gospel stuff. Where a pastor will get up and say, if you give this seed offering, God's gonna make you rich, and that's, but you have to first give to us, and then God will do. So why are you giving? So I can get rich.
Yeah.
That's, even though the irony is that Paul says in First Corinthians, or is it second? Where am I at here? Like Corinthians, I guess it's Second Corinthians, but he says God loves a cheerful giver, and he says, as you give, you're not gonna outgive God. He's gonna supply your
Right.
need, but you don't do it to get.
Right.
It's still,
Especially to get rich. I mean,
Yeah,
that's not
yeah.
in the equation.
right, yeah. When we think about Christ laying his life down, yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that comment and contrast. So I think that's perfect. Yeah, really good. Okay, well, let's go to the subject that we all don't want to know. I can say from the outset that it's really important to talk about this. This is the thing that divides churches today. It's interesting, a few years ago, well, back in 15th century, or 16th century with Luther, we had all these theological struggles, and those are still there, and all those differences are there. But what tends to divide churches today is social issues. Like what's your stand on the role of women, or what's your stand on homosexuality or gay marriage? What's your stand on, this subject or immigration or, this, and these are important issues. But before we get to them specifically, at first I want to tell you that we're started the first year of my Sunday morning class. We're going to be looking at our national denomination just passed a social statement, which is just a teaching document on the church and society, how the two interact. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at some stuff I've written. We're going to look at some critiques of what our national church did, just to get a nice, robust conversation about it. Because we have to talk, well, how should the church engage with these things? And so with that as a caveat, the typical thing we say is church and politics don't mix. Don't talk about politics at church, right? And I'm with that at a certain level, but with a caveat, I guess. So the first thing we have to do is distinguish between morality and political or social action. So we're going to talk about morals here. When it comes to ethics, I think Lutherans would start with what Jesus said is the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's one part of liberty. And love your neighbor as yourself. So we start there. How do I live in the world and have love for my neighbor? Now, that doesn't solve all the problems, does it? But it does say that we are here to care about our neighbor. And that's morality. And it has to do with what I do with my body, what I eat and drink. It has to do with what I say with my mouth. It's this thing about the 10 Commandments. Martin Luther's Small Catechism, which I'll hand out, if you haven't got one. Anybody got a small catechism? Have you ever been given one?
I
You got
have, I have a question about the one I have,
Okay, good. Yeah,
not time, but
yeah, sure. Let's make sure we get to that. And maybe that next week is a good time for that, but I'll grab one for you because I also have to go to my office before you leave tonight and get that new member, form for those who want to fill that out for us. So we think about the Ten Commandments. All those, Martin Luther's Small Catechism, the Ten Commandments is the first thing. So it shows us what it is to have a God and what it looks like to love one's neighbor. The first 3 commandments are about our relationship to God. The other 6 or other 7, or however you want to count them, is neighbor. I don't kill. I don't, commit adultery. I don't steal. I don't steal. I don't bear false witness. I don't lie about people. This type of thing. So we do talk about morality here. But at some point, morality, how do we live those out into the world, though? It's going to get political. I mean, there's just no way around it. So should the church be actively engaging in politics is a question. Some churches, I've seen Roman Catholic churches do this. I've seen Protestant churches do this, publish voter guides. This is who you should vote for. And now, by the way, the IRS prohibition about supporting a candidate even is been removed. So churches don't lose their nonprofit status if they do advocate, which that doesn't affect me at all because I'm not going to do that anyway. But so how we love our neighbor gets in there. So how should the church be involved? Some churches are very open and actively engaged in social issues. I've seen churches that have petitions for you to sign in the narthex. Methodist Church over in Seattle had one on gun control, after one of the shootings or something, so that's interesting. Like, so you go, is that, how does this work? So, and I'm going to spill the beans right away here and say, I think there's a big difference between how I, as an individual Christian, act and live in the world and how the church functions. And many people disagree with me on this, obviously, and you're fine to disagree with me too. But I think as an individual, I'm called to be out there and vote and advocate and do however my conscience feels I should. In this congregation, we have Democrats and Republicans and Independents and Green Party. We had the founder of the Tea Party a long time ago. It's maybe passed away now or something, but we have a diversity of ways that Christians feel they should engage in the world. And I encourage individual Christians to get out there and either protest or don't protest or do this or do that. Whatever you're going to do, you should, as a Christian, engage. That is for sure. And we're going to probably do that differently. People have different convictions. But by saying that the church is filled with individuals who are out there doing their vocation in the world, we can be a church with diverse opinions. See, the problem when the church says, okay, now this is what we're going to do together, when it comes to maybe a public policy issue or something, then what happens for the people that don't agree with that public policy? They don't think that is the Christian thing. Then they may leave. And that's exactly what's happened in our country. People are also moving from one state to another to be in a place that fits their values. So, and we are bombarded with this, vindictiveness in our politic, right? I think this is true. I mean, it's always been true. I mean, I think that's the genius of our country, truthfully. I mean, you look back at Abraham, you look back at any time and you see what was said in the newspapers, and oh my gosh, this is nothing new under the sun. But yet, I think it is at a level that we haven't seen it in my lifetime. I mean, I've had congregational families that I've had to get together with or try and help. Their family blew apart because of who they elected as president or who they voted for, you know, and it's serious. It's real. I'm not saying it's not important, but you know, this is the adversarial place that we find ourselves. So if the church is gonna take a political stand, then that ends up being divisive. Now, there are some people that say, hey, it's so clear cut that we should all be able to be on the same page on something. Yeah, first, yeah.
I think that the church almost, in my opinion, has to take some political stance, not necessarily in terms of like endorsing a candidate. I would agree that that's kind of outside the scope, but you know, the big topic issues of like abortion, birth control, homosexuality. People are going to ask those questions of the church, like believers, what should I believe? What should I do about these topics?
Yeah.
And, you know, so then the church having an opinion and a published and accessible opinion, I think is important. But I think where it gets tough, and I think you're kind of getting at with like the individual vice the group as in the church, is that I think part of the role of the church is that the church is not as fluid as we as individuals are. So like the faith is very, very old, especially when you think about like Catholicism, Judaism, you know, they've been around forever. And if they moved with the same like fluidity of opinions that we do day to day or year to year,
Our culture does.
right, or the culture even, how much like trust would we have in that organization's ability to like speak the truth? So it is a bit of a crossroads really, where people are seeking answers from the church, especially on a lot of those hot topic issues. And I think the church is getting backed into a corner and losing a lot of people because of a lot of those stances. But I do still think it's important that the church has those positions because it's
Right.
part of faith, and those are like big life decisions
Yeah.
and kind of like how we interact with the world. So,
Yeah,
make
make a great case, make a great case. So where, you know, like, let's, perfect segue. So our church, like, and it's beautiful with your Roman Catholic, background, the Catholic Church, you have the Pope and the bishops, the cardinals, and there are letters and positions and teaching of the church. The way that happens, although it's a little bit different because it's less binding, but the way that happens in our denomination is we have this representational system, and then at the church-wide, the national, they pass social statements. That's kind of this teaching of our church. Now, you as an individual don't have to agree with it to be in the church.
sure.
And that's probably true of the Catholic. A lot of people probably look differently at birth control or something in the Catholic Church than what the official thing is, but at least there's a strong teaching, is what you're making the case for, and this
Yes.
is important, right?
Yes.
And so, especially given that culture does move and change, I had one person say, the trouble with chasing culture is it's a moving target.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
And yet, you know, so we want to get down to like some specifics here, but we've already mentioned that. Where do you draw the line? So how does the church make a stand on morals? And yet, where is that line where it becomes too political and about that? Like I've said, so this is you beautifully set up the dilemma. So, I want to go to, well, I'll come back to the two kingdoms, some specific examples. So these are some of the issues, the hot topic issues, gender roles. Like, what is the role of women and men today? Human sexuality, same-sex marriage, the Marriage Equality Act. We know that Oberfeld was overturned from the Supreme Court, but it's so legal and, you know, or I'm sorry, Oberfeld was not overturned, but it might be. But of course, the Roe v. Wade was overturned when it comes to abortion, but it's still legal in various states. So every state now has different ones. So under the human sexuality thing is the whole LGBTQ plus. And some others have been added. You've got abortion, you got poverty, you got immigration, creation, climate change. I had one person so upset because I don't talk about climate change. And see that, so that's, I'm glad that came to mind because that's the challenge. See, I've got some more liberal folks who are saying, how can you not be condemning what President Trump is doing to immigrants, whether they're legal or not legal? You know, how can you not be making a stand about that? I have others that say, how can you not be talking about abortion and that this is absolutely wrong? And, you know, and so it's a challenge now in the Catholic Church where there's a set teaching, you know, although that does change some, but it changes slowly over time, which is probably really good. So in my lifetime, my Lutheran denomination changed, well, it was a little before when I was young, but said, you know what? We know the Bible has said this about women. There are these passages, but we also see these other passages. So we believe that women should be able to be pastors and be leaders and presidents of congregations and this type of thing. Well, that's still not true in a big swath of Christianity. So, but the way that happened is the church went back to the scriptures, really looked, talked for many, 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 many years. And then they kind of loosed that prohibition. And many other Christian churches have done that. So, you know, how do we navigate this is a really tough thing. Because people need to hear, you know, what is the teaching of the church? So I'll give you, some, depending on your perspective, this will be good news or bad news, or actually it might be bad news to both of you. So let's take the gay marriage issue. The leadership of women in our church, in my view, thankfully is a settled thing. You know, not that some people still don't have trouble with the woman pastor or something, but the Pentecostal church, by the way, has had women pastor preachers for a long time because they look at Acts 2 where it says your men and your women shall dream dreams and preach and prophesy but anyway, but let's talk about gay marriage. So in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, our expression that was a merger of these three other churches in 1988. Right from the beginning of my ministry, we've been wrestling with this issue. Many people said, you know, I didn't choose my orientation, I can't change it. And a lot of these people were lost to the church because they just got law, you know, well, sorry, you know, and the predecessor church body's position was that you can be gay, you can have a gay, same-sex sexual orientation, but you're not to act on it. So that was where the church was. Like a pastor could be a pastor and say, well, I'm gay, but okay, well, you've got to be celibate, you know, so, because marriage is the only acceptable between a heterosexual marriage is still, that's where it was. That over many years and conversations and debates, and this denomination has worked on this ever since I've been a pastor, which is over 35 years. In 2009, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America did what many other mainline Protestant churches have done. Presbyterian Church USA, now the United Methodist Church, because they've had their big split over this issue. Church of Christ, the Reformed Church, all kinds of churches have said, you know, we believe that what the Bible says about same-sex sexual activity was a condemnation of the expression of that in biblical times. So in the Old Testament, this Canaanite fertility cults and, it's crazy ritual stuff that was going on. And then in the New Testament, pedophilia was an accepted form. I mean, if you go back to some of the Greek folks and, in the sense of an older man with a younger man or whatever, not necessarily kids, so I spoke wrong, so. Not pedophilia, but, this same-sex sexual activity was not bizarre in the Greek culture. And so when Paul, but it was also very exploitative. And so when Paul condemns that in Romans 1 or in First Corinthians, that's what he was condemning. And that the New Testament doesn't understand the concept of same-sex sexual orientation. And so, a lot of work was done with biblical texts and wrestling with a heart, I believe, for how do we include gay people who love Jesus and love Christ but yet don't have a place because they're second-class citizens. And if they can't be celibate, Paul does say that celibacy is a gift. Not everybody can be celibate. Then what do we say to these people? And what the church has said, either be celibate or there's a gay bar, So the church wrestled with that. And so 2009, our denomination said churches that wish to do so could recognize same-sex. They called it a PALM, publicly accountable, lifelong, monogamous relationship. So like marriage in every way possible, except for between people of the same sex. So they said congregations could recognize those. Now, at the time, gay marriage was only legal in New England. So they didn't use the term marriage, although they could have, and they didn't, partly because it probably wouldn't have passed. But it did pass. And then they also said that congregations that wish to do so could have a pastor who was in a publicly accountable lifelong anonymous relationship. Well, then since they said you don't have to do this, but you can, this put the congregation in the position of, well, are we going to do it or not? So this church spent like a year working through this. I had 40 families in my office over a period of about 3 months. Countless churches in our denomination split up over this. In the ELCA, to leave our denomination and congregation at the time needed a 2/3 vote to leave. Well, it's hard to get a 2/3 vote. So a lot of times congregations would get 60%. And the 60% that wanted to leave the ELCA, you can't, so they just leave. So the congregation is split in two, and a smaller congregation, all kinds of things happen with this. I pleaded with our leadership, as all of our bishops, but not all, 3/4 of our bishops of our different districts or dioceses. And they have less authority in our church than like the Roman Catholic Church, but they encouraged the church-wide assembly that voted on this to use a 2/3 vote in order to do those, because, this is a big deal, but they didn't. So they got it with a majority vote. So they changed the position of the church. And some people rejoiced and some people didn't. And so this church, I had already done a survey on the subject, and because I knew this was coming. And we were around 50% for and 50% against. So we're Washington, yeah, we're a military community, so not that that's always more conservative or traditional, but maybe a little bit leans that way. So we're a little bit different. Kitsap County might be a little more than, but nonetheless, that's where we were. So we did a lot of research and said, do you want to get out of the church? And about 1/3 of the church wanted to get out. Well, that's not nearly as much enough. But that third was like, we are conscience bound that we cannot go along with this. There were some people that are just so uncomfortable with the subject, you might call it homophobia or something, but most folks here just felt like we can't do that. The scriptures keep us from doing that. We can't say this is okay. You know, we do say the scriptures are the source of norm for faith and life, so, and they just couldn't go there, and
And you
I,
made an argument that the scriptures, I mean, they could be cherry picking to that result.
well, both sides will argue over that. Some, well, you know, the traditional position will be say, hey, you're taking those passages out of context. The traditional position is like you're making all kinds of assumptions about the biblical world that we don't know is true, like actually there was gay marriage, like they would say there was no gay marriage. Well, there was. Caesar's got to say sex sometimes, so it's not as cut and dry sometimes as either one. In my own view, there's enough gray area, there is some gray area on this. I think primarily the biblical folks were thinking about these more exploited kinds of expressions of this. But that doesn't, then you have to ask, well, then does that mean that we can, by inference, conclude that we're okay if it's a publicly accountable lifelong, if it's a marriage type thing? So the church has tried to apply the same standards of marriage to gay marriage in our case. So what are we gonna do here at Silverdale Lutheran? I mean, we got people, so I'll cut to the chase and say we had a big congregational meeting after about a year-long process. And our compromise was we weren't gonna try and leave the national denomination, which has even since then gone even further to the left on issues, as most mainline Protestant churches have. Far left of where this congregation is. And yet we said to people, some people are conscious about they cannot support this church anymore. And so we created a means, if you see in the bulletin where it says restricted and unrestricted, to check out the giving and the beacon, or is the bulletin of the beacon, I think we report what was given, it has a restricted and unrestricted. So we gave the ability of some people to not support our wider church financially. They just said, I can't be a member here if my money's gonna support something that I think is wrong. I'm not in favor, by principle, I don't like it, but it's what we need to do, keep a third of our congregation from bleeding, at least. We didn't leave the ELCA, which is another third part of the congregation was, okay, then I'll stay. And so we said that, but we did also then in that compromise say we will not be conducting recognitions, and that's what we call them then, or gay marriages here. Our pastors won't do that. We will welcome gay people as just like we welcome everyone with the gospel of Christ and extend Christ's love to them, but we're gonna stop short of endorsing or, you know, conducting gay marriages. And that this church also said it would be too divisive to have a pastor who's in its same sex. Now, this was what we voted on back in 2010, so that's 15 years in. We have not changed that. It could change, but that's an example of how we dealt with that situation. I've had people leave our church because our church is too liberal, because we're even in the ELCA. I've had people leave our church because we're not traditional or conservative enough, because wait, did I say that right? We're too liberal because we're in the ELCA, or we're too conservative because we don't do gay marriage. Because they want a church that will, it's called fully inclusive, you know. And if you go to a number of our fellow ELCA Lutheran churches like First Lutheran, and I think in Holzbow, and trying to think of some others, that you'll see the rainbow flag from the church. And so that's the way we have navigated one of these big issues. And again, I'll say this to finish just that issue, that there were people hugging each other who were diametrically in different positions, shedding tears after that congregation. what this church basically said is, we don't want this to blow up our church. So we're gonna have a compromised position. Now, some people would say, and you might even feel like, well, you compromised your values to stay together. Well, I guess I would say there's enough gray area that I think that that's warranted. Like, I wouldn't compromise the gospel or a lot of things just because it was divisive. But in this case, you know, bottom line, it's what the church decided they wanted to do, and it has worked and preserved our congregation and kept us going. The bishop at the time, who was not a progressive liberal kind of bishop, said that we were the flagship of how to work through a conflict like this in our synod or our diocese as such. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that this church said we don't want this issue to divide us.
So this is not possibly, but about stroking you or anything, but given that this is a member-driven church, as we discussed, that whole navigation required a lot of leadership. That come from you, or did the committees somehow, how did that all
Yeah,
work?
as lead pastor, I was very
Drove.
I was very kind of steering the ship, the process. I had one person come to me and says, Pastor Bill, we've been dealing with this now for 3 years or whatever. And he says, I still don't know what you really think on this issue. Because I didn't believe it should be what they think. And now we did Bible studies on it. We looked at the text. We did, you know, and we still will end up talking about that. So, but I would actually say our church council and president and vice president were the real drivers, and I was the support folks. So, and yeah, so our leadership was very intentional that way. Our president at the time and our vice president at the time, our president was more progressive in her thinking, and our vice president was more traditional and conservative, and they worked together on it. And we came through it. But now we got gender theory, and we've got so many other things. And I wish I knew the answer. But I think that there's different ways of being church. And some people want to be in a church where they're more of one mind and they can, you know, sign the petition when they come in the church. That as an example, you know, that most churches don't do that, and some people like being in a congregation where there's not agreement on social issues, but you know, we're still one in Christ and we're together like this church is. So there's different ways to do it. And I go back to what Marissa said, that, man, how do you be a teaching church? How do you help people with morality and yet also live with disagreement on some of these very difficult issues? So, yeah.
In my opinion,
Yeah,
at the risk of being a heretic, because I'm not a complete scholar, I would think if Jesus were in this room with us tonight,
yeah,
he would say, well, wait a second. What's the first and great commandment? Has nothing to do with this issue, your relationship with God.
yeah,
What's the second commandment? It's love your neighbors yourself.
yeah.
To me, it's end of discussion.
Yeah, yeah. And the traditional folks would say, Tom, that it's the most loving thing to say to a gay person, this is not, you know, being active in this, but to use that is not good for you. I know that.
Okay.
That's truly, there's a lot of the people that I know that they feel like it is the more loving thing to say, not to say you're gonna go to hell or you're excluded, but to say this isn't, don't go down this path, is what they would say. And the church should hold the ground. And I don't know, Marissa, like in the Catholic Church, that's kind of what they've said, I think, but on this issue, that.
Yes, the Catholic Church is incredibly black and white on
Yeah.
all of
On
this. Yes.
Yeah, so, yeah, so, but I get you, and that's, and when my leadership, I've tried to help people understand the other side, where they're coming from. And I've had many conversations with more traditional, I guess you could say, conserving folks say like, well, they're just disregarding the Bible. They don't care about the Bible, and that's not true. The people that I know, they have a heart, that so many gay people are lost to the church. They can't be celibate, and so there's not a place for them. And, you know, what do? You know, do we just, sorry, you know? And they have a love for these people, and they want them to know the love of God. You know, they want to give them the love neighbor. They want, you know, they see that, and they think that loosing this standard and allowing them to be in a marital relationship type thing is the most loving thing to do, is the most Christ-like thing. Because after all, Christ did reach out to the marginalized, right? He did reach out to the people who were, you know, shunned in the time, you know, so absolutely, that's where most people are coming from. So, yeah.
These issues seem to be more motivating for people to get involved with than, for example, creationism. I mean, there's a lot of energy around creation science, for example, but it doesn't rise to this level of,
No.
which is, I think, telling us something different.
Yeah,
Don't know exactly what.
yeah, yeah,
No, I have nothing to add, but that is a really interesting point.
yeah,
Yeah, just where we choose to focus our energy in the church, absolutely.
right, yeah,
I came
Please.
from Missouri Synod,
yes.
which is way more strict, and I don't know today because I've not been back to.
They have not budged on this issue.
So
Yeah.
I have a gay person in the family.
Yeah.
Not like my son or daughter, but
Yeah.
in the family.
Yeah,
And I worked very hard not to be judgmental because it's not my place to judge them.
right,
You know, it's my place to love and to accept you for who you are. But it's also the thing that if you have a child that is stealing or making bad choices in life that's gonna get them in trouble or something, you still have an obligation to tell them that, gosh, make good choices, you know?
yeah,
Be sure in your mind, make good choices, don't make bad choices that are gonna lead you down a bad path.
yeah,
So I can be supportive in all of the interhuman relationship
sure,
type things, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I'm going to stand and say, you know, you should
go for it.
go for it. You absolutely
Yeah,
should, but
right.
I'm not going to tell someone that life choice is what's best for them.
Right.
But I don't.
You're
You know,
not-
all of our problems are between the ears. In how we hear is in how we decipher what we think the meaning of something is being told us, you know, it's all of your problems are between the ears for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think for the church, do we believe God's word is constant or do we believe it changes?
Yeah,
I believe it's constant. I don't think that God looks at human issues that have not changed in all of humanity and changes his mind
Right.
on what any of that is.
yeah, we got this wrong, you know, or it's now
But
right.
I also think he knows that we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter if I'm a sinner, just like somebody who's,
Right, a gay
you know,
person.
a gay person.
Yeah,
It doesn't mean they're not a sinner because they're a sinner also,
yeah.
right? So I give them I don't judge. I don't know God's 100% full intent, except that he wants me to follow him, he wants to forgive me, he wants me to accept that he sacrificed his son
Right,
and he was reborn and that we can all be reborn.
yeah,
And I don't think that it's up to me to judge. I'm much happier with a church that I have no problem with women being in you know,
leadership or.
leadership. I mean,
Yeah,
you can go back and read the writings and I don't remember the name, but there were women deacons in the church.
yeah, Phoebe,
Way back.
yeah,
right, way back.
Phoebe delivered the letter of Romans, to the
Right,
church in Rome.
exactly. So, you know, no issue.
Yeah,
I think the other is way more cut and dry,
yeah,
but it's not up to me. I'm not the judge. I'm not the one that
yeah,
has, you know,
yeah,
But-
oh, I appreciate what you're sharing, yeah.
you know, they just, I could never,
Yeah.
I probably would not. Like like there was just a church, I don't remember which denomination, that the pastor just came out and announced he was transitioning because he was,
Yeah,
I doubt I could do that.
right,
I don't think I could do that.
yeah, yeah,
Now, I don't have any problem giving to this church because you take the money and you use it. I don't know how much goes to the national, right? I mean, I don't know.
7.5%.
Over, you do good works,
Yeah,
you know, and you're teaching
mhm,
the love of God
right,
and grace
Right.
with the law.
right,
And it's not up to me to be the law,
right,
right? And it is up to me to try to provide grace.
yes. I
But
think,
that's,
I think what you're, I really appreciate how you've, Stephanie, how you've articulated that, and that is an important position that I think one can take. That, okay, in your case, the whole issue of homosexuality being outside God's will and still being considered sin in any context, whether it's in a, you know, is pretty cut and dry compared to the women thing. And I think you're right in this sense that I think there's way more scriptural support for the leadership of women than for gay marriage, for instance. The argument with homosexuality in the New Testament is that the passages that say it's no good don't apply to our situation today. Okay, you can make that point, but there's nothing on the positive side that whereas in the women, and so every situation is different. But what I love about what you said is that I think we can love and make a place for a gay person
Mhm,
and not say, you know, go for it.
right,
And maybe even say, you know, this church, in this case, we have a lot of questions about it. And so as a pastor, like a lot of parents ask me, well, if my kid came out and said they were gay, what would you do? You know, and I say, I have no qualms with what I would do. I would listen. I would make sure that they know that doesn't separate them from the love of God in Christ. And I would listen and talk and make a very safe space for them. I would not say, oh, no problem, go for it, you know.
exactly.
I wouldn't do that, but I wouldn't condemn them either. And then I would help them look at how different Christians look at the scriptures. And I would say, okay, now here's the passages. So you need to take this seriously. But now this is how some Christians have worked with these passages. And if you have a fixed orientate, you know, and you can't, I mean, Exodus International, this has been a big one for me. This organization that kind of helped people get out of homosexuality, they basically gave up. You know, because they, you know, people, all the therapies, all the things, you know, there are people that have been healed and changed and don't have that anymore, but it hasn't been that successful. So, but I would love that, make a loving care space, and I would put in their hands the scriptures, and, you know, I'd help them wrestle with it, just like, you know, we all are doing. So, some churches might say, well, you gotta just not do that, or you're gonna go to hell or something, you know, that's what we wouldn't do, you know, and what I want. So, cause I think on some of this, there's some gray areas, so that's where you said it's not my job to judge. And when I hear that, and I think this is the way you mean it, it's not my job to say you're going to hell or you're going to heaven, you know, my job is to say, Christ died for you and loves you more than words can say and forgives you all your sins, just like he does me. That's my job. And then, you know, but I'm also like, okay, what is right? What is wrong? I'm not gonna just leave them out there to swim on their own, but I'm gonna help them work through it. And where there's gray area, which I don't think stealing, there's any gray area. You know, stealing's wrong. You know, how do you live out your life? You know, and be a steward of your sexuality and who you are and who God made you. These are all, you know, so we would work through it. So that's what I like about where you're at. Many of our churches in our denomination are at the point of, they, like, our former bishop of our synod, his son was gay, and he just, I was straight out, says, one, being gay is not a sin, which we all should agree that, you know, it might be a part of the brokenness of the world, but, you know, and a lot of people I'm thinking of, you know, they knew they had this same sexual attraction from the, you know, as far back as they can remember. But then what you do with that is where, you know, it might, is it sin or not? And our bishop was like, you do that in a public camel lifelong monogamous relationship, it's not sin. Just absolutely. And that's what I'm not prepared to say personally. Because I just think there's, in my case, it's not quite as cut and dry as for you, but if there's enough gray area that I could not, as a minister of the church, stand up and say, you know, great.
Well, we're all sinners, and I don't think that there's a level of,
Yeah.
well, you're only a 1 and you're a 2.
Yeah, right.
I think it's pretty even.
Well, right.
So,
And that's where I want to say it's a law gospel issue. How do we welcome people into this church? We don't do it by changing the law. We do it by preaching the gospel.
exactly, I agree.
Yeah. And we're gonna have differences on what we think the right law is on some issues. You know,
So I'm pretty far on the progressive side of
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
My daughter goes to a church, a Lutheran church in Kirkland, and I would, put for lack of a better word, I would say it's quite a woke church.
yes,
And what I find is that it's, not that I disagree with those progressive issues, but it's almost a distraction because it takes up too much time. Takes too much energy dealing with, as opposed to the core things that I'm believing the church should be focusing.
interesting, yes. I want to bounce off that. Kathy, I don't know if you want to jump in here at some point, but feel free to do so if you want to or not, it's fine. But I just don't want to miss you if you're trying to throw in, but.
No,
that's
I'm
Tom,
taking
that-
a listening posture.
Okay, great. That gets to a perfect way to end this little conversation, or big conversation. In Lutheran theology, Luther said, and the reformers said, there are two kingdoms. Think about Jesus said when he was asked, can we use this, can we give this coin and pay taxes? And Jesus said, give to Caesar Caesar's, God is God. There's two kingdoms here. He also said in the Gospel of John, my kingdom is not of this world. So in our tradition, we say there's the kingdom of Christ that's established through the preached word and the giving of his sacraments, the forgiveness of sins. This is the church, this is the Beatitudes, this is the Sermon on the Mount. You don't do vengeance, you don't return evil for evil. Somebody takes your coat, you give them your cloak too, and you know, now you don't run the civil government that way. If you ran a country that way, it wouldn't exist. Other countries would just take it over. No, there's a temporal realm that's governed by God's natural law and the Ten Commandments, you know, these types of things, and the civil world, the temporal, and those are separate. So the church should be about, and I think that's what you were saying, that it's almost a distraction because they're so involved in those woke issues, whatever they might be, like, you know, immigration or LGBTQ stuff or social justice. And, you know, on the conservative side, I've been to churches that are waving Trump flags in the sanctuary. You know, and championing the, now that maybe is a bad example because that's not really a conservative position, but championing more traditional values and political action around that. Whether you agree with that politic or not, I think we've gotten off track. I think what the church should be about is giving the word and the sacraments to people, their relationship to God, and then encouraging them to have that relationship with their neighbor, but we're gonna have some diversity about how we love our neighbor and how we do that. And so in our national denomination has become very politically involved. I mean, the delegates of the churchwide assembly, not this last time, but 3 years before that, went down to the ICE office and were protesting because of what was going on with immigration. That was back, I guess, the first Trump administration. So I don't know, they weren't protesting. Anyway, they look it's hard to distinguish them from the Democrat side of things, truthfully. as with some churches, it's hard to distinguish their position from the Republican side of it. And I just think that's a confusion of the kingdoms. Different, I don't wanna say they don't overlap. This kingdom over here affects as it transforms individuals and they live, like someone's a Christian and now they're in a public office, that's gonna affect how they live out that public office. But the church isn't telling them what, that we have a beautiful thing of keeping the church and state separate. Because you know what, anytime you put the two together, who wins? The state. Look at all the horrible things the church has done in the history of Christianity. It's always when it's been linked to empire. So it's a beautiful thing that the forefathers and mothers of our country said, we gotta think about this distinction. And I know the history of the Establishment Clauses by Thomas Jefferson, and believe it, you know how this happened? I'm pretty sure I have this right, but I'm a little bit out of my lane here on this. The Anglican Church in the South was so strong. Everybody that was in public office was Anglican, was Episcopal or whatever. And the Baptists were coming around preaching. And they were getting all kinds of people coming out because they were these great, fiery pastors, and people were coming out to listen to them, and they were getting people from the Anglican Church. So the city officials said, it's illegal to preach if you don't have a license. And they wouldn't give licenses to the Baptist preachers. So they made it. So it was an internal Christian fight. And Thomas Jefferson saw that, and he took pity on the Baptists. And he was as far away from being a Baptist as you could possibly be. He was a deist, he wasn't even a Christian. And he said, no, the government shall not establish a church. Because the Anglican Church was establishing the Anglican Church. He said, no, we're not gonna do this, like they did in the Church of England. See, so now I know that's been now where it was to keep the government out of the churches, the establishment of the church, now it's been used to keep God out of government, which I think is a mistake to some degree. Anyway, but it's of course transpired over hundreds of years of being, worked with. But anyway, I think there are two kingdoms and they overlap, but I think we need to distinguish them. And when the church gets really overtly political, I think it makes a mistake. But that line is hard to know where it is. It's like, where does it change from me advocating for my neighbor and also saying, what the government's doing right now with immigration?
I know that
Yeah.
when I went to Methodist Church.
Yeah.
For a few years.
Yeah,
And I enjoyed it, and then, Vietnam War came along,
there's a good example.
and every sermon was a political sermon about the war. I don't go to church to listen to that. I go to church to listen about God and grace and love and the things that help in, you follow and the support of more than two gathering in his name.
Right.
Right? So when it becomes you trying to tell me I must have this.
Yeah,
Whatever particular opinion, and that's what I have to listen to for an hour,
yeah,
I stopped going.
yeah.
I would rather read my
great-
Bible at home.
It's a great example. It's a great example. And that sometimes I get so depressed because of so many of these issues, but I was a kid when the Vietnam War was going on, and I can't imagine being a pastor back then. But it's the same thing, but people also will push back, and I know we're over time, but people will, I said we would be, so I think that's fine. People push back on my position with not going political here. With the civil rights movement. Well, if the civil rights movement would have never happened, Pastor Bill, if the churches were, this goes back to a few slides back here. Sorry, I know we gotta go. But are Lutherans quietists? Do we not sing? Well, I think, we had bishops that marched with Dr. King, but they didn't say, okay, everybody, you have to come with me.
They led by example.
They led by example, and I think they acted out their individual Christian vocation in the world.
And that, I think
And that's
that
the difference.
example gets followers a lot more than shaking your fist or.
Right, and using the bully pulpit, because that's the other thing. See, I believe that I've been told, you give people Jesus. This is, I think, what you're saying. I mean, I'm here to give you the gospel. And yes, I'll talk about morality and the law from the pulpit, but that's where it gets sticky. The hardest thing I do on Sunday morning is to write the prayers. What do I pray about?
I think you're doing a good job.
I'm gonna upset the Republicans or the Democrats or the Libertarians or, I mean, how do you pray for Israel today? What do you say? The whole Gaza thing. I mean, that's another example. So these are all very difficult things. We're not gonna solve everything, but I hope this has been helpful for us to dive in. And yeah, please.
Just a quick question, where can we go to learn more about the ELCA's specific doctrine and then Vice SLC's things that they have gleaned from it / settled on? Is there a resource for those two things?
There is for the first.
Okay,
If you go to the ELCA website, elca.org.
Okay.
And you look up, social statements. They
so,
have social statements on abortion, church and society, on human sexuality. They're very long. I've always been critical of them because they're too long
yeah,
for the average person. It's like, sometimes like the human sexuality one's like a book.
oh, yeah,
But you can glean the church's positions.
okay,
Those are the official teaching documents.
okay,
Those inform the church's official policies, though.
okay,
So they're related, but they're not exactly the position of the church, for instance. As far as where SLC falls out on all that, we don't have social statements as a congregation on all these issues.
okay.
It's a gray area, I guess. Other than, we teach the Ten Commandments and the creed and the,
Which
so.
is why I'm here, because I went online and started doing research on, because I didn't even know what denomination this church was, and I had been coming here to
Yeah.
services,
Right,
but I didn't ever go look at what,
yeah, Yeah.
But then I went online and I started to go, okay, maybe I need to go to foundations class and learn
yeah.
what.
Yeah, so this church, I would say. Many of the more recent social statements of the ELCA, this church would not be on board with
Okay,
by. A clear majority. Certain number of folks would be fully supportive. Like,
Mhm.
we're going to, and like I say, really. If this class continued, starts in January on Sunday mornings in between the services, because we're gonna look at the church's recent statement on church and society.
Mhm.
And how these, how this all works.
Mhm.
I'm gonna try and avoid, well, I'm sure individual issues will come up, but, I really wanna talk about how this works, and so, but yeah, that's where you would go, but the only one for sure that you can go to is because the church had to decide about gay marriage. In essence, the gay recognition, this church said, no, we're not gonna do it.
sure,
So
okay,
that's this church's official position right now. But that is not in our constitution or bylaws. That's just a resolution that they voted on. So that could get removed at some point. I know, and some people are praying it will, and some people are like, praying it won't. So, yeah. Is that helpful? Yeah.
yes, it is,
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah. So, but they're long, but
I believe it,
if you need some reading before to get sleep.
I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Are there any issues about gay people, attending the sacrament communion?
No. I commune everyone that believes that Jesus, what it says that, given and shed for you. Yeah, we have trans people here, people of transition, we have gay people in our congregation. Because we don't do gay recognitions, we don't have as many couples, here, and. Yeah, that's part of the struggle of being who we are. So, yeah. So this is a lot to think about, isn't it? So I saved it for the last class, just. So I keep you for the whole thing, no. thank you for this very heartfelt discussion. And Ani and Jennifer, hopefully we can have coffee and we can debrief some more of this. Next week, I hope you just come to the orientation, whether or not you're gonna be a member or not. because-
Same time.
Yeah, same time. Yeah, and then we'll just talk about more practice and, okay? We're way over. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Go forth in peace and grace. All right, yeah. Okay, thanks, Kathy. Thanks for your good listening. Good chaplain.
Thanks, Pastor.
All right, thank you, Rosa. Yeah, you guys take care. Okay. Stop share and stop the recording.